And good evening. It's Benjamin Morgan, Chief Executive of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia. And I'm back for a second time this week. You just can't get enough. Our conversation tonight, we'll be joined tonight by two panellists. We had hoped to have a third here this evening by way of AOPA representative Stephen Bennett from the Oaks Heritage Aerodrome on the fringe of Sydney. But unfortunately, Steve is not too well this afternoon, and we do wish him all the best and a speedy recovery. And we're going to be looking forward to having Steve join us next week sometime. But this evening, our conversation is going to centre on regional airports and how sport, recreational and general aviation can in fact benefit local communities in townships outside of Sydney's, outside of the metropolitan spaces on the coasts surrounding Australia, and how aviation can actually be a really important part of creating tourism success and investment in those areas. And to join us as part of that conversation, we'll be joined a little bit later in the program by Craig Sinclair, who is the Economic Development Manager of Temora Shire Council. And we're really looking forward to catching up with Craig, learning more about all of the things that have been happening out at Temora, a fantastic and sterling example of a local council embracing aviation and harnessing it to build success for their community. Our first conversation this evening, however, is going to focus on Cootamundra-Gundagai. And for many of you that have been following AOPA over this past 12 months, there's been a range of activities that AOPA has been involved in down at Cootamundra-Gundagai. And largely, it's centred on the creation of an Airports Advisory Committee. We have a local representative who sits on the ground down there, and his name is Clinton McKenzie. And Clinton is no stranger to this program and has been watching as this has evolved over the last few years. And he joins me right now to have a conversation about Cootamundra. G'day and welcome, Clinton.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and good evening. And let me say and reiterate that the council's to be congratulated for setting up the committee. We had a meeting as recently as yesterday. They're quite robust events. Sometimes they talk about matters operational. Yesterday was about the tawdry issue of money, and I'll talk a bit about that. But at least they are listening. We're listening to them, and we're getting the message loud and clear from the council. But they're also getting pretty strong feedback from us. But I mean, I'll just note as a bit of background, Cootamundra Aerodrome steeped with history. I'm looking at the Government Gazette of the 27th of October 1921, where the Commonwealth acquired a chunk of land down here for defence purposes. That chunk of land is a chunk of land that I'm sitting on at the moment. Cootamundra Aerodrome was the terminus of the first England to Australia mail route. That started up in 1934. So the terminus wasn't in Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne, which was a reflection of the weird and wacky things that happened in the Federation, why, you know, the Parliament House had to be in Canberra. But the mail route ended right here in 1934. So Cootamundra has been around for a long time. It was established before Temora, so I'll claim seniority on Temora. The Oaks, Bankstown was planned in 1929, but it wasn't built until I think 1940 and 1940.
You know, they say you learn something new every day, and I did not know that that airfield was in existence prior to Bankstown. There you go.
Yeah, so we're coming up to 90 years that Cootamundra has been here as an aerodrome. So no one around should be able to pretending that it hasn't been here. But Cootamundra Gundagai Council, and the name itself is indicative of a couple of problems that have arisen, one of which has been imposed on it from the outside, and the other, I think, is self-inflicted, and I'll talk about that. But it's about money, and we are now again the issue of money and payment of fees and landing fees is looming large, and it doesn't need to, but I'll walk through why it's looming large. And what I think needs to be done about. But Cootamundra-Gundagai is a marriage that's been forced. It was forced on the two councils in 2016, and it's a very, very unhappy marriage. And both the mayor of the council has gone as far as asking for a divorce, which has been refused. And reading from the ABC, quoting from the mayor, it's a disgrace. And now the council is seeking a rate hike of 62.6%, 0.6% over 5 years. So who knew that amalgamation would result in efficiencies of that magnitude? So naturally,
Absolutely. And I think I'll jump in here. I think this has been an airfield site where for quite a few years, the relationship between the council and the airport kind of fell into a situation of having a little bit of a divide between it, because there was no real direct means of having input from the aviation stakeholder side through to the council side. And I think it's very fair to say that broadly our aviation industry, everywhere I've travelled and on all the engagements I've been involved in with respect to aviation participants, we all understand that successful airport communities are a partnership. They're a partnership between the airport operator owner and the aviation industry itself. And so as our local representative on the ground there, Clinton, you were working quite tirelessly there for a fairly lengthy period of time in trying to build up a head of steam to get the council to a point to recognise that we needed to create a meetings process, a way in which information can be exchanged between the council, the aviation stakeholders, issues can be elevated, they can be discussed and debated. Because what we find nationally is wherever airports have strong airport advisory frameworks, councils are able to much more efficiently and more effectively deal with issues before they become problems. And we see these kinds of problems all the time. A council make a decision, the decision becomes fait accompli, and then all of a sudden the aviation industry is pulling its hair out saying, what is going on here? And I think of recent, we've had one of those situations arise where council have gone out to a public consultation prior to bringing any of this before the Airport Advisory Committee, with a proposal that in order to attract the gliding community to come to Cootamundra and to spend many, many thousands of dollars during a 3-week camp, that the council wants to impose a per head charge for the privilege of these people coming to that local township and spending money. Can you maybe just reflect on that? How has the aviation community at your airport reacted to that, and what's the council saying?
Well, as I said at the meeting yesterday, they've had 3 goes at this, and the attitude of the council, which I can understand at one level, is they've got to charge somebody some fees because of the financial circumstances that they're in. But I sort of liken it to someone in a lifeboat in the ocean being tempted to drink the seawater to slake their thirst, but that way lies madness, and it's going down a path which is counterproductive. So last year I got the local gliding club to keep track of how much money it spends in the local community, and report that to council to say this facility brings money to the community. Apart from all of the other things that it is, it's also a fire station and it's an ambulance station, and to try to get across to the council the value of the aerodrome for that purpose. And so the council's had a couple of goes at introducing various fees, and the third attempt is introducing fees for an added fee for the people coming down for the gliding camp, which is very, very frustrating, because it's sort of it is dissuading them from coming down.
Well, Clinton, that is exactly right, and we have many past precedences to show that wherever a council takes a position to try and charge the aviation industry for visiting the town and investing their money in the town and spending up big for multi-week competitions and aviation sporting events, it almost invariably ends in the aviation group withdrawing from the town and finding another location. Now, I dare say we're going to be joined a little bit later in this broadcast by Craig Sinclair from Temora. I'd have to hazard a guess. I think Craig and the Temora Shire Council will be very eager for the gliding community to take their business to Temora, because their investment when they go, when the gliding community goes to these places and they stay for 3 weeks, there's a fair amount of money spent. Now, I've heard estimates that could be anywhere from $60,000 to $120,000, depending on the number of participants for that year. I mean, is that right?
Well, for last year, the club, I think it was $42,000 or $43,000 that they added up, and it was a relatively smaller camp. The previous year, there's with all sorts of strange things have happened over the last few years, so there's a lot of disruption. But what I just want to touch on the numbers, because for the council it's about dollars, and I think it's important to get some insight about the dollars that we're talking about. Now, I'm looking at the New South Wales government reporting portal, and it says that in 2018-19, Cootamundra-Gundagai Regional Council had total revenue from continuing operations of close enough to $43 million. Now, of course, that means nothing in isolation. They've got to spend money. But from the council's own figures, did it cost them in that year $1 million to run the aerodrome? No. Did it cost them $500 million? No. Did it cost them $100,000? No. It cost them around $80,000. Now, which is still money. But as I've said to the council, the way in which they account for these things artificially exaggerates the costs and artificially excludes income generated by the aerodrome. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that the accounting principles are wrong. They're doing what they're doing, but it looks like it's a loss maker. But when you look at the figures, the biggest number, the second biggest number, which is nearly 25% of the expenditure, is general rates. And when that was queried, that turns out to be rates the council charges itself and pays to itself. So it's not really an expense. I count as expense. If I take $50 out of my left pocket and put it in my right pocket, I don't income. That's an expense. Now, it's a line item, and this is normal business practice. But so you take that out, and so now you're down to not 80,000, you're down to 60,000, and then there's income from the hire to the clubs and all this sort of stuff. And back in 2018, there was $15,000 went in for those sorts of things. But I found out at yesterday's meeting, because I'm a bit slow, I had an epiphany. I walked out of the hangar door, and there's these resplendent crops of canola in paddocks that are fenced off, but they are aerodrome land that has been leased to a local farmer. And that's all fine, because I asked them how's that process. But we had an ag person at the committee yesterday, and he came up with an estimate of the value of the crop, which he then halved, and he said $100,000 for the crop. Now, it's the sweat of the brow of the farmer that's done that. Good, they work hard, they make the money, but the lease payments, the farmer is paying for that land to the council, does not show as income generated by the aerodrome.
Just to be clear, we've got an aerodrome site. We've got a council that says, look, this aerodrome site's operating at a loss. The aerodrome site has a significant parcel of land. A fairly large parcel of that land has been leased to a farmer to grow canola, and he's leasing that, making a payment to the council, and that income is not showing on the books as income to the airport, and clearly must be shown as income to general business or some other item.
No, and wait, there's more. So I bought a hangar at Cootamundra. I'm a refugee from Canberra because I got sick of making a private citizen a billionaire over there out of infrastructure that was built by the taxpayer, but I won't go down that path. On land subdivided from original aerodrome property and sold, the proceeds of those sales and the rates we pay on property located at the airport, I bought it at the airport because I've got an aeroplane sitting out of the hangar because it's an airport, does not appear as income. The owner of the ag business has been here for decades, employing people for decades and keeping local agriculture running for decades. He said, what happened to the $1 million that was given to the council as part of the ALOP program? Now, the councillors didn't know. They said it probably went into general revenue. It probably did. And I'm not criticising them for that. And then proposing to subdivide more blocks of land and sell them off. And I said, on your accounting process, the proceeds of that sale of land given to you as part of the aerodrome will not appear as income generated by the aerodrome. Now, fortunately, the councillor that was there said, yes, what we've got to do is try to isolate that as income and or capital for that. And I said, yes, yes, we do need to do that, because in my world, and I said this, and I told them that I was going to say this publicly, as far as I'm concerned, the aerodrome pays its way on a dollar in and dollar out basis. It's just that it doesn't get reflected on those numbers. And that's even before. But
it's a very important distinction that you're making there, Clinton, because the outcome of the current accounting processes is that the council feels a justification in its conversations within its business team to look at introducing additional fees and charges, because it's operating. Quite likely the councillors are in an environment where they are they've been left to believe that it's operating at a loss, and so therefore any proposal to bring forward additional fees and charges will be supported, because it's a reasonable assumption that if it's losing money and a proposal's there to put some fees in. So this is a very important issue that you have worked on here, and it's an issue that's quite critical to the future here at Cootamundra-Gundagai, because if in fact the airport's breaking even, and the aviation industry is already contributing to covering its costs, any further costs or charges that are being added on top, it's getting to a point where you've got to start to question, what is the purpose of the council seeking to make a large profit off the airport when it's a piece of community infrastructure designed to attract investment and activity to the region?
Well, they're not. I don't think they're trying to make a profit. I think they're trying to deal with the perception that the aerodrome is making a loss, and it shouldn't be. And part of that problem is the misconception that most of the users of the aerodrome are rich private pilots flying around in their jets, private jets. Most of the users of this aerodrome are using it to put food on the table. The agricultural business, crop dusting business, has been flat out supporting the local agricultural business. There's and they've employed people in the local community for decades. One of the largest regional aviation maintenance organisations here, paying rates to the council, has been employing people for decades. We've got it's a firefighting facility. A few years ago, huge firefighting aircraft parked 20 metres outside my hangar. My son thought it was, an astronaut. There's a guy in flying overalls with the helmet on, ready to go. And I'm sitting there going, if there's a fire anywhere near me, I know this guy's within range because he's 20 metres off the front door. Anyone within range of that aircraft, as a member of the public, is getting the benefit of that risk mitigation from that aircraft being here. I see Medivac aircraft come in and out. Those people are flying to make a living. They're not doing it as an indulgence. They're picking up people to take them for medical treatment. When there's an accident out on the highway and a helicopter goes to Cootamundra Aerodrome, Cootamundra Hospital helicopter landing site, they come down here to refuel because, as we know, these helicopters are short range. So, as you say, part of the process is the community and the council understanding that it's a national asset, it's a local asset, and it's a national asset that happens to be used very occasionally by private pilots. I wish we had a much more vibrant general aviation community, and it got used much more. But I look out my front hangar doors at the old Masling hangar, Masling Airways, now defunct, and all this sort of stuff. So it's an asset to the local community, even if it's making a loss, which I say, if they'd actually manage the income from the money that's actually being generated and has been generated by the aerodrome, it isn't even a loss maker on the dollars front, much less the public benefit front.
All right. Well, look, we are extremely fortunate, Clinton, to have you as our representative there on the ground at Cootamundra-Gundagai, attending those advisory committee meetings and giving up so much of your time to do all of the background research that goes into looking at all of these individual issues. This is how we build a strong aviation industry, through our members being part of this process. And at this juncture, what I'd like to do, and I'm sure you'll reaffirm this, the way that AOPA continues to be at the forefront of these issues is we need more of our members at airport locations around the country who have the time and the interest in becoming involved in these issues. We cannot physically, as a small organisation, get to every single advisory committee meeting right across the country. And I know that our members broadly right across Australia want to hear more about what is happening at airport sites. And so if you're an AOPA member out there and you would like to work with the association, we would love to work with you. If I could get you to reach out and to send us an email, I'll just put my email up on screen. It's ceo@aopa.com.au. Just like Clinton, members work through their local communities and they're in the relationship they have through those airport advisory committee meetings with council or the airport operator, and help report back to the national body what's going on. It helps us keep a finger on the pulse, and it enables us to tailor our advocacy with both local, state and federal government to effect for change. And Clinton, you and I've worked, side by side on so many of these issues now over the last 12 months. It's not something that AOPA can do on its own. We have to have boots on the ground, don't we?
Yeah. And I think it does. It is advantageous to be able to go to these meetings and eyeball people, and then eyeball you, and poke you in the chest, metaphorically, and poke them back and say, well, and understand their arguments. I mean, they don't consider this to be a public facility. The discussion yesterday was, well, anybody can walk down the main street of Cootamundra or ride a push bike or ride a horse down the main street of Cootamundra, but they can't do that at the runways at Cootamundra. And so it's not a public facility. But you say, well, any member of the public can get on or get off an aeroplane there, any member of the public. So it is important to have those face-to-face discussions as much as possible so that you can understand their thinking and they can understand your thinking, because somewhere in between there's hopefully there's or a way forward. Because if I can convince them that drinking the seawater is not the way to slake your thirst, that is increasing fees, because in order to, on their methodology of accounting for the costs and income of the aerodrome, it's never ending. The fees will just have to be so high that we all know that discourages people and they just go somewhere else.
All right.
Yeah.
So we're going to be short on time, Clinton, and you know me, I could talk for hours with you on this subject. But here's the good news. Whilst we do have councils where we have challenges, and I'll call them challenges, we've got councils that haven't yet had their come to Jesus moment and realised how effective aviation can be for their local townships. And I believe that we can win that war, and we will win that war with the help of our members and a determined effort to engage through these meeting processes. The good news is that there are councils out there. There are other councils out there that have come to that moment. They have seen exactly what aviation can do for them. And in fact, today I was reminded of the good in local government when I received a telephone call from a council up north of Armidale, who, as a consequence of actually having a conversation with my next guest here, reached out to AOPA to say, look, we'd love to start a conversation with AOPA on how we can encourage aviation at our site. We would love to see our airport being used. We would love to see our airport being connected with more of the industry bodies and associations. And so that is a perfect junction for me now to bring in our next guest. I'd like to welcome Craig Sinclair. Craig's the Economic Development Manager for Temora Shire Council. Craig, thank you so much for making time for us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
You've just had the opportunity to sit and listen to us complain about one council, and then we'll jump into one which we have a lot of time for. There's many of us right across the aviation industry that have so much admiration and respect for what is going on in Temora with respect to the airport and aviation. And so it's quite a pleasure to have you join us this evening. And maybe a great place to start, Craig, is to give us a little bit of an overview of where you're at with things in Temora, some of your highlights. You're just closing out quite a big capital construction program on your runway upgrades, and I believe you're also looking at some additional air park developments towards the future. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. So for those that don't know, Temora is just located not far down the road from Cootamundra, about 40 minutes drive. So we're definitely neighbours in the regional sense. And I'm not sure whose airport was built first, but Temora is now certainly quite a sizable airport compared to Cootamundra. We've got 3 runways, 2 of them paved and the other one's gravel, plus a couple of grass runways as well. So the longest one being 2 k's long. And that was built only in the last 10 years. But the original runway, which was built 1836, was built after the Great Depression as a government stimulus to increase investment in the regions. That's just had a $5.35 million facelift, or we're coming into the final parts of that, where we're resurfacing that entire runway, and we've built a parallel taxiway to that to be able to access 0523. So that's a great bit of infrastructure now. We were having to use 1836 as a taxiway to get to 0523 before that. We've obviously the biggest change in the airport really came about around the change of the millennium, when David Lowy came and decided to set up a hangar here, which eventually became an aviation museum. Council at the time thought that was a good opportunity to establish some hangar and house packages, so creating the air park estate, and that has kind of grown pretty exponentially, actually, over the last 20 years. So we've now got over 100 lots at the air park, with residents from all over the world brought together with a common enthusiasm for aviation, many of whom have kind of anchored because of the museum. And I think there's a lot of air parks that are starting to get developed, and a lot of them come and ask us, for our lessons learnt, which we're happy to share. Because there are challenges in terms of the design, and a lot of local governments aren't, they're not experts in managing airports. There are companies that are set up privately to do this, and that's all they do, and some of them do it better than others. But there are a lot of challenges, and they do suck a lot of resources. And so we've tried to come up with ways that manage the benefit to the community and grow aviation without increasing the overheads too much. Whenever you put in more infrastructure, it needs maintained and it needs to be depreciated, and all those kinds of things that all come off the books, as everything does in local government. And local governments don't make money; they rely on
very good at spending it.
Yeah, very good at spending it, and there's a lot of priorities to balance. So we don't get it right all the time, but we recently released back at the start of 2019, the latest release on the air park estate, which is another 20 lots, Spitfire Drive. That we normally sell about, on average, 5 to 6 lots a year. I averaged it out over the 20 years we've had. And Spitfire Drive sold completely out in less than 2 years. So we're at a stage now where we have run out of air park land. We do have a proposed subdivision for another 40 lots. Putting in another taxiway that will actually open up a whole lot of land that we've just rezoned 2 years ago to be in the same air park zone. So it's what we call the SP1 is the zone there. So it's activities incidental to aviation. So that does allow people to live there as long as there's a hangar there as well. But in the last 6 months, I've seen lots more inquiries for businesses and individuals wanting to relocate or set up a business here, or relocate their general aviation interests here. Obviously, and that's great news. We're just waiting for the funding to be confirmed so we can get that started.
So Craig, I'll jump in. I mean, obviously Temora it's just an outstanding example. It really is. And I've been fortunate. I've been out there quite a number of times for both museum days and for other engagements that I've been part of. The thing, though, that is not lost on me is that when aviation events are held, and you travel into town and you visit the pubs and you go and you visit the cafes and the shops, the people of the region in Temora, they really are positive. They really embrace the pilots and the aviators coming to town, and it really feels, from an aviation perspective, you really feel like, wow, the town throws open the door and it says welcome and they want you there. I mean, from your perspective, what's your views on how the town reacts to aviation? How important is aviation to their trade and commerce during those peak aviation seasons?
Massively important. I think that a lot of the prosperity in Temora is because of the Aviation Museum and the wider airport. So I think, through the millennial drought, a lot of other towns were losing their builders, and Temora was maintaining the number of builders there. We've got over 30 building firms in a town of 6,000 people, so it's quite a high number. And that's because of the construction that was happening at the air park during the millennial drought, because of the air park estate and all the hangars and stuff that was happening there. External money coming in, being invested in the community. If you look at our tourism brochures, at town entrance signage, everything has aircraft, aviation all over it. We know that that's what is synonymous with our town, and we hang our hat on it. Or I think we're at the point now where we're trying to diversify that and build on that. But we still know that that's at the core of who we are and what we're known for. And I think because of the continual events that the Aviation Museum have held and other organisations have held out there, and we're very lucky to have them, businesses and the wider community have really begun to understand and embrace aviation and what it means for our economy and the tourism spend and the number of visitors that come here. There's a lot of people that you go to and travel around Australia, and people will, when you say that you're from Temora, they will recognise it because of the airport or because of a function that they've been to at the museum.
You've heard Clinton and I, you were in the green room back there listening to us waffle on a little bit about the situation at Cootamundra-Gundagai. And it's a very real situation. I mean, the gliding club right now, looking at the prospect of having to enter an arrangement of paying a fairly substantive per person fee to come to that town, spend 3 weeks. I mean, how do you think your community would react if you were trying to put a fairly substantive per head toll on bringing people into your township who during their time, they're going to be paying for accommodation for 3 weeks, they're going to be paying for meals for 3 weeks, they're going to be visiting those pubs and clubs and spending money. And frankly, we want to see them do that. We want to see them spend every last cent they've got in that town to bring that prosperity to Temora. How do you think your community would react if you were imposing those kinds of fees?
Well, it's like everything. We need to balance the usage and the costs and the benefits with things. And it's always a difficult balance for council to make. So the way we approach it is if an event is looking to run on council-owned property, then they need to fill an event application form and supply all their insurances and what have you. And there are fees and charges that come with the use of anything, and it depends on every event. No event's the same. But the way we look at it is if you are looking to have any fees or charges waived, then you write a letter, you make your case, you state your what your investment is in through that event and how the community benefits, and it's up to council to determine what they waive and what they don't. And generally speaking, if you're seen to be contributing to the economy, then those fees and charges are waived. And the airport for us makes a loss. There's no doubt about that, and we've tried to find ways that are innovative ways to recoup some of those costs, and they're not always popular decisions either. Some of those, fall on the burden of the residents that live out there, for aircraft maintenance levies, airport maintenance levies. But those are fees to maintain the taxiways that are essentially, mostly private infrastructure or semi-private infrastructure that you have to live on the air park to be able to use those taxiways, and it's a user pays fee in that kind of situation. So they weren't necessarily.
That was a very delicate way of bouncing around that, and I appreciate the situations.
Yep.
It's obviously trying to provide one perspective from a council to another is always difficult. I guess the conversations that I've had behind the scenes with you though is that your council very intimately understands the benefit of having these kinds of aviation events, and I would assume I'll say this: you would not be opposed to the Glider Club bringing their 3-week camp to Temora and bringing that investment to your local township and doing everything you could to encourage them to make that happen, would you?
Not at all. And look, I think the way that if I was presenting this to another council, if I was holding the event, is to be saying, if I was a business, trying to attract a conference to come to your town, and I was bringing people staying in your hotels, and we're talking about some particular topic for a week and staying in a hotel, what would the council do to incentivise that event? Would they sponsor the event? Because people recognise that conferences are great ways to add financial incentives to the local economy, and events like this are no different. So people are coming to the town. They're spending money. They're contributing to the economy. The investment that they make, and we found this, is not necessarily just at that event. They're also likely to come back and set up their business or buy on the airpark estate. And those kinds of things, in terms of a long-term view of aviation and what those events provide, is something that we certainly take seriously. And that's where the community that we've built up at the airpark have become our biggest advocates. And the people that come and attend the events, and like yourself, are spreading the word. And we don't find that we have to do that much because all these people are coming here and having such a great experience. And I think that's an investment in marketing and those kind of things that you just can't buy.
Well, we're often reminded, Clinton, in our engagement with councils, that councils look at aviation as a business unit of council, and we quite often always get told, well, it's got to compete and but councils themselves have to compete too, don't they? I mean, we've got a situation, this is a great demonstration, this exact issue, that we can have the Cootamundra-Gundagai council with its airport offering a product for A, but then we've got a fantastic sterling shining light example like Temora with a fantastic facility, equally as prepared to host these events. This is the kind of competition aviation needs, isn't it?
Well, I mean, Cootamundra is not going to replicate the Temora Aviation Museum unless we can find a few more spare Canberra bombers and Sabre jets, etc. I need to emphasise that the Cootamundra is a great town, and it's welcoming mostly of aviation, and the council wants the gliding competition and all that to happen here. But that's the dilemma that it faces, and it sees that the mathematical imperative is to charge fees of someone, when really it's got to be that longer term. What businesses call what Temora has is the virtuous circle. It's built up the reputation. People come there and say it's a great place, and so they buy there, and so the place gets bigger, and that once that virtuous circle starts up, but they've got to take the risk. And I should add, the gliding club was already paying fees to come and use the aerodrome because it was booking out the terminal building for its sole use. So it was paying fees for that. It doesn't object to paying for the use of the facilities, just as the guys that come down here. We've got another one next year, the drag races. I encourage it, the people that come in the car clubs, but the aerodrome is no time closed, so they pay a fee because they've turned a public aerodrome into something for their sole use, and they pay for it as they should, and that's part of the income. So the council, as I say, they've got this caught between a rock and a hard place, and it's very difficult for them to say, the way to fix this is not to charge more, it's to encourage more and to recognise more and to think outside the triangle. And I'm hoping that the sale, if the activity to subdivide and sell more hangar blocks, and there's demand for them, provided they do that properly, recognise the income properly, and that will generate its own activity. Hopefully that'll be a way to get the own virtuous circle going here at Cootamundra, and maybe we'll set up a little museum to celebrate a bit more
Clinton, and that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about developing a community on the airport site that gets to a certain level, that it has a critical mass to it, and then the community itself starts to become its own advertising and kind of has its own ability to generate inclusion and addition. And that's really what's taken place at Temora. It's gotten to a point now where it is iconic. And if you've not been to Temora and you're in the aviation industry in Australia, you've been under a rock. I mean, if you haven't been to the museum on a flying day and you've not been out to experience just the awesomeness of that collection and the work that they do and their engineering capability, and of course the airport and the air park. I mean, I was out there not that long ago, and the air park was just, it blew me away, that the construction and development that's gone on out there. It is just, it's burgeoned. So look, I think there's hope for Cootamundra-Gundagai airport and the relationship there with the council. And I think that highlighting these issues as we've done tonight, and I thank Craig for speaking openly and freely about this. And in fact, I should just let everybody know that I have invited Craig to participate more in these airport discussions and to regularly keep in contact with us here in helping communicate what's going on out at Temora, because I know that everybody, we want to hear the success stories. We want to hear the good stuff. We talk a lot on these programs, unfortunately, of the things that are going wrong, because it's very important that we talk about it, we debate it, we discuss it. That's where the genesis of great decision making is made, through actually putting it on the table and having good, honest, open, frank debate. But we also want to hear about the good stuff, and it's great to have you join us, Craig, to talk about the successes that you're having and to hear about how your community embraces aviation, and that your council has a direct and meaningful understanding of just how valuable private sport, recreational, general aviation is to the future of your township. So thank you.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
No problems. Well, we're going to drop Craig at this juncture, and we're going to continue the discussion. So thank you very much, Craig. We appreciate it, and good night.
See you, Greg.
Okay. Right. Now, last word for the program this evening is we got news this afternoon that the Civil Aviation Safety Authority have now moved forward with the approval to increase the weight limit for recreational aviation to 760 kilograms, and that'll come into effect by the 2nd of December. And already my phone ran crazy this afternoon with people calling up saying, I can't believe that we've arrived at a time where weight limit increases have been offered and we still haven't moved forward on pilot medical reform in Australia. Everyone's saying, Ben, what's your take on this? And it's been interesting because, Clinton, I've said to everybody, well, at the moment, I'm going to hold my judgment on this, because CASA have given an undertaking that they are going to initiate a pilot medical reform consultative review before the close of this year. Now, we're obviously running out of time. We're already at the 11th of November, and there's not that many more working weeks left of 2021, and then, holy cow, we're into 2022. But I did want to just discuss briefly with you before we close out the program the issue as I see it here, and I want to make it clear for everybody that gets a chance to see this program. And I might just cut this section on its own and I'll post it up to the website so people can see this in its exclusively, because I want this message to be understood. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association does not have an objection with recreational pilots being able to fly heavier aircraft. There is absolutely nothing within our organisation with respect to policy, attitude, or intent that we want to withhold a pilot's right to fly whatever aircraft he wants to fly. Now, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association believes that all pilots, regardless of where you earned your stripes, should have the easiest possible process to follow, the most affordable process to follow in your participation in aviation. However, where our objection sits with this is that we fail to understand how the Civil Aviation Safety Authority can continue to deny the rights of RPL and PPL holders who choose to fly the same aircraft as those within the RAOs from the same airports in the same airspace for the same reason, that for some reason pilots who are managed under the CASA system with a VH on the side of their aircraft, somehow they should be discriminated against and they should be denied their right of access to a medical standard that should exist. Now, I know you've got some pretty strong opinions on this, and your opinions are very, very sound, Clinton, which is why you and I have had quite a few conversations about this. But it really is a frustration for AOPA that CASA have been unable to recognise that in order to solve this problem, the answer is simple. Every other leading nation around the world now has implemented a private driver's licence medical standard to support private aviation. They've done it in the UK, they've done it in the US, and they're now doing it in a multitude of other leading countries. Why aren't we moving forward on this? It does not make sense. And I'm going to throw this to you for the last word for this evening. But I discussed this issue with the Deputy Prime Minister's office today. Nobody from the Civil Aviation Safety Authority in the 6 years that I've been with AOPA has ever been able to explain how the regulator has arrived at an outcome where they can stand in front of Senate estimates and they can stand in front of the Australian people and they can say, we believe it's perfectly safe to allow pilots trained to the RAO's RPC standard, flying aircraft built to the world's lowest manufacturing and certification standard, flying in the same airspace as pilots trained to the world's highest private licensing and training standards, in aircraft built to the world's highest design and certification standards, that those people represent a lower risk to safety than allowing the most highest trained, most experienced in the safest aircraft to fly with the same medical standard. It is just, it's an insanity. You cannot explain it. They can't explain it. To me, it seems like it's the biggest lie that's ever been perpetrated on aviation. It's been going on for 2 decades. I've beat this drum so many times that people are probably sick and tired of hearing me saying it. But, you know, it fails. It fails on so many levels. It's almost now no longer even humorous. It's just disgusting that it continues, and it has to change. It really has to change, because CASA should be basing its decisions based on science and based on data and based on fact. It appears that whatever the justifications have been to continue to discriminate against RPL, PPL holders, it just can't continue to stand. So with that, I'm going to offer you today the last word, and when you're finished, we'll be done for the night. So Clinton, your last word on this topic.
Well, my second last word on this topic is to commend to everyone the submission number 66 to the General Aviation Inquiry by Mr. Mark Newton. I've never met the guy, but he sets out all of these bizarre distinctions that have no basis in objective risk, objective cost grounds. And plenty of people have explained this. But I learned a couple of decades ago, I'll say this, one of the most important epiphanies I had a couple of decades ago was the realisation of the extent to which aviation safety regulation in Australia is based on emotion, interest groups, politics, whatever, and most of it is dressed up. You put the safety of air navigation in a sentence, and whatever ridiculous proposition that you want to put in that sentence, no matter how outrageous or silly or unsupported it is, simply gets sway. And that is because the Civil Aviation Safety Authority has been effectively left to its own devices for more than a couple of decades, and it's created a system that it runs, and the outputs of it are these randomly bizarre decisions. So I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to fix it.
Well, it's a frustration, Clinton, and you know, as I've said, my phone ran crazy this afternoon. I ended up getting a huge burst of phone calls from people after this email broke, with people saying, you know, what's going on? You know, are we going to be left? Are the RPL and PPL community going to be left once again discriminated and denied their rights? how can this situation continue to be justified? And, I started work this afternoon, and what I did, and I promised that this would be our last word, but I just want to explain a few points.
And I'll give you one example.
I sat down in front of my computer and I went back to the videos of CASA talking before the Senate inquiries. I've kept, I have a full catalogue of videos for the 6 years that I've been with AOPA. Every Senate inquiry, I have every single inquiry, and I've cut them down into videos, and I've indexed them so that I can go back and I can see, what did CASA tell the government 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago? Now they've been standing before Senate committees telling the senators that there is a weight limit. There's a weight limit, and it has a cutoff point, because if you fly heavier aircraft, you have to have a much higher level of medical fitness. Well, apparently you don't, because apparently now what CASA are saying is, we don't mind if you take your general aviation aircraft, take it off the VH register, move it across to RAOS, self-certify your medical fitness, and go flying. Now, good on them. As I've said at the opening of this, good on them. I do not begrudge anyone having a right to fly. I spend my entire working life defending the community's right to fly. I am your loudest advocate, and I believe you should have that right to fly. But I question the continued discrimination of the RPL and the PPL community, because that is exactly what this is. There is no longer any objective science. There is no longer any objective science that can support CASA's argument to continue to deny this. It's been adopted by leading nations. It's been implemented successfully. The results out of the US, Clinton, were astounding. There's a graph, and some charts that show that the safety of self-certification medicals is better. It's actually better. Work that out. How is it safer? But it's better than the results they're getting out of regulated, supervised medical processes. So, I'd pull my hair out, but it's starting to recede, but I'll try not to. It's a crazy outcome.
I can suggest an answer to that, because I've said this before. I've said it publicly. I wrote something about this in the wake of the appointment of the new PMO. My view is that AVMED in CASA has become a force inimical to aviation safety, because some pilots become too scared to go to a doctor to talk about something for fear that it gets back to CASA, and suddenly you are grounded, or suddenly you are required to undergo expensive tests, or tests that have risks of death, orders of magnitude higher than you winning the lottery. Once it gets to a driver's license medical, then you can go to your doctor and say, "Doctor, I've got this funny lump on my hip," and or whatever it is, and the doctor can say, "Oh, that's fine," or the specialist, and you're not. I'm coming up to my next medical, and it is my 2 yearly interactions with AVMED are the single most stressful interaction in my life, for that reason, because I don't know what, I won't say it, what crazy thing will come out of left field where AVMED's got another great idea about how to impose an intrude. I'll give you another example which supports exactly what you said about flying. When I was manager general aviation ops, all of these flying training organisations who had AOCs would come to me and say, "We are being undercut by the AUF because they are charging money to do flying training, and they don't have to have an AOC." And I said inside at CASA, I said, "Well, how can this be?" Well, they're members of a club or something. But I said, the AOC requirement in the Act doesn't have an exemption from it. You can't, they charge, now I say good on them, because they've proved, all these organisations have proved that you can train people to be pilots safely without having to have an air operator certificates. And that's why we need instructors doing flying training as they do in other civilised nations, without having to have all of the regulatory rigmarole of an air operator certificate. So all of these distinctions are historic, they're hysteric, and they're very, very frustrating, and there is no objective safety basis and cost-benefit basis for them.
Well, Clinton, it's going to be the subject of a number of panel discussions as we move forward over the next few weeks. I reached out today to a number of key representatives and have invited them to come along. It looks like we're going to have a pretty busy week next week, and definitely would invite you to continue taking part in these processes to gain your insights on the issue. My final shout out today just has to very quickly go to the team at Wings over Illawarra. Now, the Wings over Illawarra Air Show has been a major attraction in New South Wales for the aviation industry, and just gets bigger and better every single year. And for the past couple of years, as a result of COVID, the air show found itself firmly grounded whilst the Australian population found itself in lockdown. But the team have managed to get the event up and going for the 27th and the 28th of November this month. It's not too far away. And the aviation industry has the opportunity to come together, get out to this fantastic air show, and to get back to celebrating what we love so much about aviation, which is our freedom to fly. And so if you get the chance, I'd love everyone to log on to www.wingsoverillawarra.com.au. Grab yourself a ticket. You can get it from the buy tickets section here, general admission. Get yourself a ticket. Come along to Wings over Illawarra. Come and say good day to everybody. Mark Bright and the team are a fantastic organisational team there in Shell Harbour, Wollongong Shell Harbour Airport. They go out of their way. They invest a lot of time, effort and energy into preparing these shows to bring everyone the latest and the greatest of aviation. You can see they have a fantastic lineup of events and activities there. We'll be on hand. I'm actually this year going to be heading down. If everything works out, we're going to be flying down in the Falcon Air Falcon 900 corporate jet, and we'll be catching up with the Shell Harbour City Council representatives there, and hopefully we'll be extending an invitation to take them for a VIP flight in that aircraft and to talk to them about the airport site and development opportunities. But we're going to be down there with the aeroplane, catching up with all of our friends and meeting new ones along the way. And so if you get the chance, wingsoverillawarra.com.au, grab yourself a ticket and come along. You certainly will not regret it. Well, Clinton, thank you so much for coming along this evening. As usual, I always appreciate your feedback. For those of you out there that enjoy us running these programs and talking about the issues and debating and raising the hairy subjects and having the insights and the fights, please become a member of AOPA. Support the organisation. We're all here fighting for your freedom to fly, to protect your aviation industry, to protect your airports, your right of access to pilot medicals, and to all the things that you need inside of aviation. We're not just here to talk, though. We're here to do, and so many things come up from week to week with members contacting us on small issues through to complex issues. We always will fight for you. We are here for you. We're your association, trying to do our best to make aviation better in Australia. And even at local airport sites like Clinton and his team at Cootamundra-Gundagai, to Ian Carfrae and the boys down at Maryborough, to all over the place, we've got AOPA members, and they want more aviators, pilots, aircraft owners and businesses to become part of the membership to make the association stronger and more effective with our overall advocacy. So I invite you to jump online to www.aopa.com.au/membership. And with that, thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Safe flying, everybody.